What is something about yourself that sounds totally made up but is 100% real? I was once sponsored by the Crunk Energy Drink Company for sailing. I imagine I was the only sailor on their list. I literally just emailed them saying that I sailed and asked if they wanted me to put stickers on my boat. They sent me a few cases of the drink, t-shirts, hats, the works. My car was known as the Crunk Mobile. That's badass. I never graduated high school, but I have a bachelor's degree. I was homeschooled and my mom never went through the legal steps to actually get me a real diploma. So she made one in Photoshop that was then used to get me into this podunk community college that didn't verify it. From there I got my associate's degree, which I then used to get into a decent university where I got my bachelor's. I homeschooled and didn't have a legit transcript when I applied for college. I made one on my computer. They accepted it. I was shocked. I died first, and then was born. I've told this story a few times on Reddit, but I enjoy telling it, so here we go again. During the cesarean to bring me into the world, there was some major complication on my mother's end. She started bleeding internally, drowning me in the womb. When I was removed, the doctors tried to get me breathing but couldn't. I was declared dead. My mother was still unconscious, but my dad was brought in to say goodbye to me. He held me in his arms, was saying goodbye when out of nowhere I started coughing up blood and screaming as babies do. Apparently it was the weirdest moment in his life, being abjectly terrified and overwhelmed with joy that I was alive. It's my favorite story to tell, because weirdly it takes some pressures off on birthdays. I don't do well with too much attention by family friends, but celebrating my death day doesn't bring people the same connotations. My great-grandfather worked in the textile business and started importing rayon fabric from Japan in the late 60s and 70s. Keep in mind this was during the early days of synthetic fabrics and traveling to Japan was not all that common. On a business trip, he met some Japanese businessmen who were selling newly designed transistor radios. His contacts wanted to set up an exclusive import agreement for their electronics to North America, but my great-grandfather declined. Because how many of these radios could you possibly sell? Turns out that was a short-sighted business decision, because that company was called Sony Electronics. He turned down the exclusive import contract for Sony. On the other side of my family, my Canadian relatives walked away from 100 acres of land in Alberta during the Dust Bowl and Great Depression. They decided it was not worth paying the taxes on their land. Turns out that land was right in the heart of the Albertan oil deposits. Also on my mother's side of the family, they used to have a citrus orchard near Los Angeles. They sold it cheap to some land developers. That farm was right at Hollywood and Vine. My family on both sides is bad at seeing long-term investments. So, dump any stocks recently? I saw the former Prime Minister of Poland in his underwear. That's not how the rhyme goes. I see London. I see France. I see the Prime Minister of Poland in his underpants. Once in college I applied for a job at the library help desk. I figured I would help people find books. Didn't give it much more thought than that. During the interview, I aced all of the customer service questions. Then they asked me whether I knew how to defrag a hard drive. Cue alarm bells in my head, but I kept calm outwardly and said no, but you can teach me. I worked in IT for 3 years by accident. They were too nice to fire me. I made my last boss swear on her life she wouldn't call me for tech support. They call my cell when I'm sick in bed and ask how to reinstall the printer not a dang week later. I was at a store when Tony Hawk was signing autographs. I was only 10 at the time and was a huge fan. One of his early video games had just come out. The store had a couple TVs on the wall and some video games to play. Being a kid I waited for one controller to open up and someone leave. A kid ended up leaving and I grabbed the controller and started playing and minding my own business. A couple minutes later the store wanted to grab photos of Tony playing his own video game. He came over and grabbed the second controller and began to play multiplayer with me. Probably played for 10 minutes. The bonus was it was also my 10th birthday, so I played Tony Hawk Pro Skater with Tony Hawk. Edit. Wow, I made this comment and didn't return to Reddit until just now. Was not expecting it to be that big of a hit. Thank you. I do not have photos of myself playing the game with him, but I believe my parents have a couple of photos of me with him and getting his autograph. I still have the signboard on my wall. A horse threw me in the air when I was a child, but I wasn't on his back. He grabbed the skin of my back with his teeth and yeeted me, as whole horses. L had one bite my back and stomp on me. My mum didn't believe me till she saw the teeth marks later. I built a 13-foot tall T-Rex with Christopher Walken's head, and New York Magazine called it highbrow and brilliant. I took my mother for a surprise trip to NYC. She got married to my father there in 1968. The surprise was manufactured by way of telling her we were going to Australia. We live in New Zealand, so a trip to Australia is not a huge deal. It's the type of thing you could do for the weekend. And therefore she packed a bag and brought her passport. We got to the airport and said, surprise, we're going to New York, and she cried her eyes out with delight. When we arrived, on our first morning, I said, okay, what do you want to do? She said, when I was last here, in 1968, the Twin Towers weren't complete, so I'd like to go to the top of them. Your wish is my command, I said, and off we went to the WTC. That was the afternoon of the 10th of September, 2001. Suffice it to say, there was a particular poignancy when we looked out the window at around 8 AM the next morning. I am allergic to lettuce, like I carry an EpiPen allergic. I found out my father wasn't my biological father in 10th grade biology class. We were learning about blood types and traits. I raised my hand thinking I was a smart ass. Your chart isn't accurate. My dad has AB negative and I'm O positive. My teacher said, I think your mom has some explaining to do. And we all chuckled. Turned out, he was not my father. So how did that play out? I came home and laughed about it to my mom. Went to a friend's house and got home around 8 PM. When I got home, my mom was waiting for me. My mom had a stack of pictures on the foot of my bed and told me, that's your real father. LOL. So that's how I found out. I was actually okay with it. The person I thought was my father was already kind of a loser deadbeat. Turns out my dad was also a loser deadbeat. No loss, I guess. Would have been awesome if my dad would have turned out to be a decent human being. So, tragic story. Not a happy ending. At least I can look back and laugh. Kind of a funny way to find out. My dad's name is Luigi and my uncle's name is Mario. They are brothers. ETA. I forgot to add that my dad is also a plumber. Spent a really cool day in London with Christian Slater and his mum. His mum is adorable. Christian Slater is adorable as well. I sneeze when I think of Essex. Every single time. My wife likes to give me shitty if I just sneeze innocently. She thinks she's a riot. Edit. Judging by all the Me Too comments, this isn't as unheard of as I thought. If you sneeze because of Essex, don't worry, you're still a freak. But you're not alone. Now your wife gets turned on by people sneezing. Reverse card. My dad kidnapped me and took me to Singapore for very malicious purposes. I'm sure you could imagine. I was 15 and my dad literally had fake documents and suitcases filled with random clothes. When we got there, we went to a sketchy hotel and after 15 minutes he went to the bar. A bit after that, some guy just walks in. I was confused, but he began muttering saying I was too pale and too old, and he left. I called my dad but he didn't answer, so I climbed out through the window and went to the police. They put me on a plane home that same hour. I don't really tell people because it's a bit of a crazy story and sounds made up, hence why it's here. But yeah, holy ducking shitty. Are you okay? I once won a $500 raffle during a routine visit to my local tea shop. It was the building's annual Black Friday event and there were 5 baskets with varying amounts of goods, services, and coupons. I needed tea, so my only stop was the tea shop. It cost me $20 to fill my tins, but they said raffle tickets were given out after a $25 purchase. I said duck it and got a hot tea for me and the woman in line behind me. Entered with that one ticket. I got a call a few days later saying I won the top prize basket. When I went to claim, they asked about my purchases. I told them and they said the drawings had over 1,000 tickets and many people had over a dozen entries. The raffle prize included $25 to the tea shop. One of my ancestors was dumb and bought one of Napoleon's doorknobs. It turns out it's fake. Doorknobs were invented after Napoleon died. I'm intrigued by the fact that this is the story that your family decided to pass on from one generation to the next far enough to lose track of the relation and just refer to the subject as ancestor. Man, I would really hate it if my great 14 grandchildren had a story like this about me. My great-great-grandfather was a Pinkerton detective, acted on vaudeville, and had 5 wives in 2 different states that knew nothing of each other. He also slightly changed his last name each time and never got caught until Ancestry website happened. LOL, sounds a bit like my great-grandfather. He had a wife in France, and then 2 in the US and neighboring counties. He was caught though. My great-grandmother was wife number 2. She found out about wife number 3 and divorced him. No one knew about the first wife in France until I pulled his service records from World War I. Did he ever encounter Vandland or O'Driscoll gangs? I had my tongue surgically enhanced for more reach and flexibility when I was 8. Edit. I'm super jazzed by how many of us are out there. Interesting. I've never met anyone that has had their tongue clipped. Had mine done as a toddler and I guess they sort of overshot the mark because I ended up with a Gene Simmons style. Yeah, mine was bad enough that I couldn't really reach the back of my upper front teeth, so L's were a particular issue until I had it done. I got hernia by sneezing too hard. I got mine trying to match my wife's pregnant belly. Pop, I feel sorry for laughing. What a way to get it. My great-grandma ran a brothel back at the turn of the 20th century. She was Algonquin and people were pretty racist back then, so she had a hard time getting business. Since it was a coastal town, Maine, she bought up a couple leaky old rowboats and would load them up with hookers and booze and row them out to the ships at night. When ships came into port, most of the crew would get shore leave and hit the bars and brothels in town, but they always had to leave a few sailors on the ship to keep an eye on it. My great-grandmother figured those guys had money too and probably felt left out. She basically set up water-based lot lizards, or Uber hoes. My grandpa and his sisters grew up in the brothel and no one would talk to them or socialize with them. My grandpa met my grandma picking green beans for a local farmer. They fell in love. When they wanted to get married, they had to leave the state to get away from her family that were utterly disgusted that she would marry the son of a whore. So they ran off to Detroit because GM was hiring, and that's how my family came to Michigan. My grandpa left his royal status to marry my grandma. Who's your grandpa? Prince Harry. He's from the future. I once drove a locomotive backwards through the Canadian Rockies. Like this video and this good boy will deliver you a delicious watermelon. We are Redditation, and we Redditate every day. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a wonderful day, you magnificent people.